I'm a 35-year-old dad scraping by, doing my best for my 7-year-old daughter, Ellie. Life wasn't always this hard, but when my wife passed away 2 years ago, everything changed. Now, I juggle a part-time job at a mechanic shop during the day and deliver pizzas at night to make ends meet. It's not glamorous, but it's steady, and it keeps food on the table and a roof over our heads. Tonight felt longer than usual. I glanced down at the address scrawled on the latest receipt, a house way out past the edge of town. I sighed, thinking of Ellie back at home, probably already asleep, with her little nightlight casting its glow in her room. This delivery would push me past midnight, but I couldn't afford to turn it down. Every tip counted, and right now, every dollar I made was for her. The place looked like it hadn't seen visitors in years. The house was enormous, looming over the gravel driveway with dark, broken windows that seemed to stare back at me. This wasn't the kind of place you delivered pizzas to. It was the place you told ghost stories about. But I wasn't about to back down. The receipt said prepaid with tip, and I needed every dollar I could get. The front door creaked as I stepped inside, the air thick with dust and something else, something metallic. The house smelled like old copper, and the shadows were so thick they seemed to pulse around me. I called out, "Pizza delivery!" But my voice just echoed back, swallowed by the emptiness. I made my way down a narrow hallway, every step muffled by a thin, worn carpet. The walls were lined with old portraits, their faces watching me with expressions that grew stranger the longer I looked at them. Each one seemed to shift as I passed, the eyes following me down the hall. At the end of the hall, there was a large, ornate mirror. I caught my reflection in it and paused. Something about it was wrong. The man staring back at me looked like me, but his eyes were empty and hollow, and his face had this strange, twisted smile that I hadn't made. I took a step back, heart pounding, and looked away. As I turned to leave, I heard a faint voice, like a whisper carried on a cold draft. "Tom." It was impossible, but it sounded like my daughter, Ellie. My blood ran cold, and I spun around, searching the empty room. There was no one there, just dust and silence. I looked down at the pizza box, my hands trembling as I slowly lifted the lid. But instead of a pizza, I saw a doll, a small porcelain figure with Ellie's face. Its eyes were too real, staring up at me with a smile that didn't belong on her face. I nearly dropped the box, a chill crawling up my spine. I bolted, abandoning the box and racing back down the hallway. My footsteps echoed in the silence as I sprinted toward the front door, my heart thundering in my chest. I burst outside, gulping in the cool night air, not daring to look back. The house seemed to watch me as I sped off, and I knew I'd never set foot in that place again. I'm 20, a junior at a small college in New England, and I deliver pizzas on weekends to help keep up with tuition, rent, and everything else life throws at me. The job's not bad, though I'm always hoping for solid tips. Usually, my shifts are a mix of late-night frat houses, quiet family homes, and the occasional creepy old mansion. But there was one night I'll never forget. The night I delivered a pizza to an address that felt more like a trap than a house. It was early November, right after midterms, and the cold had set in deep. The kind of cold that cuts through even the thickest coat. I was on the last delivery of the night, just wanting to get back to my cramped apartment, crank the heat, and collapse. Then an order came through from an address I didn't recognize, out on the far outskirts of town. The address read 44 Blackwood Drive. It sounded familiar somehow, but I couldn't place it. I checked with my boss, who assured me it was legit. Someone had even left a big tip in advance. That perked me up a bit. One last delivery, then I'd be home. I punched the address into my phone, and after winding through town and past the usual neighborhoods, I found myself on the edge of a dense, dark forest. My GPS led me down a narrow, winding road, barely wide enough for one car. The trees leaned over the road, thick with shadows, and the temperature seemed to drop even lower. I double-checked the map, wondering if I'd taken a wrong turn. Eventually, I spotted a house at the end of the road, tucked back among the trees. It was old, 3 stories tall, with peeling paint and broken shutters. It looked abandoned, honestly, and I started to wonder if maybe I'd made a mistake. But as I parked, I noticed a dim light in one of the upper windows. The whole scene gave me the creeps, but I told myself it was just an easy delivery. Drop off the pizza, collect the cash, and leave. I grabbed the box and headed up the stone steps to the front door. As I raised my hand to knock, the door creaked open on its own. I froze, wondering if maybe someone had left it ajar. Inside, the house was dark, except for a faint, flickering glow deeper in. "Hello?" I called, hoping someone would answer and make the situation a little less weird. Nothing. I hesitated, then took a cautious step inside, holding the pizza box like a shield. "Hello? Pizza delivery?" From somewhere upstairs, I heard movement, a faint shuffling sound that stopped as soon as I spoke. My heart started to race. I thought about leaving the pizza on a table by the door and bolting, but something compelled me to stay. I told myself it was just for the tip. Besides, I could already hear my friends laughing at me for wimping out over a haunted house delivery. Then I heard a voice, soft, almost a whisper, coming from the stairs. Up here. It was strange but not entirely unfriendly, just hollow, like the voice barely had enough strength to speak. Against every instinct, I found myself climbing the stairs, the pizza growing colder in my hands. The second floor was pitch black, and I had to feel my way along the walls. As I reached the top, I saw a door slightly open at the end of the hall, light spilling out from underneath. "Just in here," the voice said again, closer this time. I forced a laugh, hoping it would make me feel braver, but it just echoed through the hall, dying in the silence. I stepped toward the door, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The room was empty, just a single chair in the middle, with a flickering candle on the floor beside it. The window was open, curtains flapping in the cold wind. There was no sign of anyone. I set the pizza box down on the chair, telling myself I'd done my job and could leave now. But as I turned, the door slammed shut behind me. My heart shot into my throat. I rushed to the door, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic started to creep in, and I pounded on the door, shouting. The only answer was the sound of footsteps, faint and slow, somewhere outside the room. They echoed through the house, moving closer, stopping just outside the door. "Hello?" I called, my voice barely a whisper. The door opened, slowly, creaking like something from a horror movie, but there was no one on the other side. The hall was empty, silent, except for a strange, damp smell, like mildew. I stepped out, looking left and right, trying to stay calm. Then I saw them, shadows, darting along the walls, slipping out of sight just as I turned my head. They were fast, silent, and they didn't seem to follow the usual rules of movement. One would appear down the hall, only to vanish as another darted past me, closer. I stumbled backward, pressing myself against the wall, watching as the shadows danced and flickered, moving in strange, almost unnatural ways. I needed to get out. The stairs were just a few feet away, and I forced myself to move, edging toward them without taking my eyes off the shadows. But just as I reached the top step, something grabbed my ankle, a cold, clammy hand wrapping around me. I yelped, yanking my leg free and stumbling down the stairs. I barely caught myself, breathing hard, heart pounding. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I yanked it out, desperate for anything to ground me. It was a text from an unknown number. "Did you enjoy the pizza?" I didn't respond. I shoved the phone back in my pocket, running for the door, only to find it locked. I fumbled with the latch, my fingers trembling, trying to keep my breathing steady as the shadows gathered at the edges of the room. Finally, the door gave way, and I burst out into the freezing night air, sprinting to my car. I jumped in, locking the doors, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. I glanced up at the house one last time, half expecting to see someone standing in the window, watching me. But the windows were dark, empty, the house silent once more. As I drove away, my phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. "See you next time, Jake." I threw the phone into the back seat, refusing to look at it. The whole drive home, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting one of those shadows to be sitting in the back seat, waiting. When I got back to my apartment, I sat in my car, staring at my own front door, too afraid to move. I quit the job the next day, swearing off late-night deliveries. But every so often, even now, I get a text from that number asking me to come back. My name's Natalie. I'm a 32-year-old single mom with a 6-year-old boy named Liam. Living in a small town just outside Louisville, Kentucky, life is quieter than in the city, but it doesn't mean things are any easier. The bills keep piling up, and Liam's growing faster than I can. Between his school fees, groceries, and everything else, I took on a second job delivering pizzas to help make ends meet. Tonight was one of those long, dragging shifts, the kind that starts late and feels endless. By 11:30 p.m., I was ready to call it a night, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion pulling at me as I thought about the early morning ahead with Liam. I was just counting down the minutes when the phone rang. A last-minute order came in, and my boss looked at me apologetically. "It's not too far, just out near the old warehouse district," he said. "Think you could handle one more, Natalie?" I almost said no, but I couldn't. I needed the money too badly. I forced a smile, grabbed the last box, and headed out. The roads were empty, the rain lightly tapping against the car windows. The air felt thick, almost pressing down on me as I drove further away from town. Louisville's lights faded in the rearview mirror, leaving only the dark stretch of the warehouse district ahead. The road wound through empty lots, abandoned buildings, and industrial yards. I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. The address took me to a dead-end road, lined with warehouses. The one I was looking for stood slightly apart from the others, dark and looming, like it had been left alone for decades. There were no lights, no cars, and certainly no signs of life. I double-checked the address on the order slip, 4120 Bronson Street. This was it. Maybe they're working a night shift, I thought, trying to keep my nerves in check. I got out of the car, clutching the pizza box as I approached the metal door. I knocked, half hoping no one would answer, so I could just head home and explain it to my boss later. But then, from somewhere deep inside, I heard a faint sound, like a creak or maybe footsteps echoing in the distance. I waited, holding my breath. The silence was almost suffocating. The only sound was the dripping of rainwater from the edges of the roof. Then the door slowly opened, just enough for me to glimpse a sliver of darkness inside. A man stepped into view, his face only partially visible in the shadows. He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s, with deep-set eyes and a blank expression that made my skin crawl. His clothes were dark, almost blending into the shadows, and his hair was slicked back, still wet from the rain. "Hi," I managed to say, my voice sounding smaller than I'd intended. "I have your pizza, pepperoni, and sausage." He didn't respond right away, just stood there, staring at me like he was trying to figure something out. Finally, he nodded, his gaze shifting briefly to the pizza box in my hands. "Come in," he said, his voice low and rough. Everything in me screamed not to go inside, but I was too aware of the rain soaking my jacket and the wind biting at my skin. "I can just hand it to you here," I offered with a forced smile. He didn't seem to like that. He paused, his lips curling into a slight, unsettling smile. "It's a big place," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to be afraid." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine, but I didn't want to be rude, and I didn't want to lose a tip. So, against my better judgment, I stepped through the door into the warehouse. The air inside was thick stale, like it hadn't been touched in years. I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me, the dim light from the hallway barely illuminating the narrow path inside. He led me down a hallway, his footsteps eerily silent against the concrete floor. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears, the silence pressing in on me. Where would you like me to put it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Follow me," he replied, not turning back as he continued down the hall. As we walked, I noticed things that didn't make sense. Doors leading to empty rooms, flickering lights overhead, and the faint metallic smell that seemed to permeate the air. I told myself it was just an old building, just the kind of place that always felt off at night. But every instinct in me was screaming to turn around and run. Finally, he stopped in front of a door and gestured for me to enter. Inside was a small, dimly lit room with nothing but a table in the center. I set the pizza down, eager to make my exit. "That'll be $14.95, I said, taking a step back. He just stood there, looking at the pizza, his smile growing wider, more unsettling. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly, his tone soft, almost curious. Natalie," I said, caught off guard. "Natalie," he repeated, rolling the name over like he was savoring it. "You seem familiar. Have we met before?" A chill shot down my spine. I shook my head, trying to keep my composure. "I don't think so," I replied quickly, edging toward the door. "I need to get back now." But as I turned, I heard the door creak, slowly shutting on its own. I felt a surge of panic rises in me, but before I could react, he stepped closer, his shadow looming over me. "Don't leave so soon," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "It's rare we get visitors here, isn't it, boys?" My stomach dropped. Out of the shadows stepped two more men, each with the same vacant, unsettling expression, their eyes fixed on me. I could feel the walls closing in, my heartbeat thundering in my chest. "I have to go," I whispered, my voice trembling. I tried to move toward the door, but one of the men blocked my way, his hand reaching out to stop me. "No rush," he said, his tone calm, almost soothing. "The night is young." At that moment, survival instinct took over. Without thinking, I shoved past them, bolting for the door. I heard them shouting, footsteps echoing behind me as I ran down the hall. My hand found the door handle and I yanked it open, bursting out into the cold, rain-soaked night. I didn't look back. I sprinted to my car, jumped in, and locked the doors. My hands shook as I fumbled to start the engine, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror. The warehouse door stood open, dark and yawning, but no one came out. I sped away, my heart racing, my breath coming in short gasps. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of the town's main road, the streetlights casting a comforting glow over the car. That night, I lay awake, clutching Liam close, thinking about the men, their hollow eyes, their eerie smiles. The memory still lingers, a reminder that there are places and people who exist in the shadows, waiting for someone to wander in. And I promised myself that for Liam's sake, I'd never take a late shift again.